we're stopping selling because to do anything else uh, would just make them more wound up, right? Because they're going to start to feel disrespected if you just try to crush and overcome what they're saying. So we ask a question, or maybe multiple questions, for a couple of reasons. One, to give you some breathing room, to give you some mental space to think, right? The other reason is we really actually want to understand, right? Asking questions is seeking to understand to make sure that they actually have to explain the objection and that we're not assuming we know what they mean. In fact, in many cases, when you ask a question or a follow-up question, it's not a bad idea to say, I just want to make sure I understand what you're saying. Can you clarify that for me a little bit more? You explain that to me a little differently? Could you share with me where that feeling is coming from so I understand? So you're actually telling them, I want to understand. Is that respectful? Is it respectful to the other person to say, I want to understand your feelings and where this thought, or do I just start trying to crush the objection and bury them in my all my education, right? So the asking part of savor is related to showing respect, essentially de-escalating any intense feelings, because sometimes people object with some strong, some strong emotions, and getting them to talk more before we talk. Get them to talk more before we talk more. And also, depending on the objection, and you guys have heard me say this before if you've been with me for a while, it's to hand back the hot potato of the objection itself. Like they drop this hot potato off in your lap in your hands and say, here, objection, deal with it. And if you go right into education, you're dealing with their hot potato that they handed you. But if you hand it back with a question and say, what do you mean? Now you've handed it back and they have to explain it, and your brain can now engage a little bit more as they're explaining it and they're clarifying it. And if sometimes people will just throw out an objection because it's the first thing their mind comes to, it's like the first thing that pops in their head. And when you say, can you tell me a little bit more about that? They're like, you know what, forget it. It's just throwing that out there. Or they might say, well, but they're talking. And that's the game, right? We got to keep them talking, because if an objection stops you in your tracks completely, well, then the game is kind of over. So the asking is to gain your mental space to think. It's kind of basically a stall. It's kind of buying you a little time. It's showing respect. It's making them explain it.